Welcome to Health+Tech, the show where we explore the law that applies at the intersection of healthcare and technology. Your hosts, Janice Suhida, Andrea Linna, and Jonathan Ishii, are healthcare attorneys and partners at McGuireWoods LLP, a law firm of 1,100 attorneys with offices throughout the United States and the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Health+Tech podcast. I'm Andrea Linna. I'm a healthcare attorney and partner at McGuireWoods and one of the co-hosts of the Health+Tech podcast. I'm also the co-lead of the Digital Health Innovation and Technology subgroup here at McGuireWoods. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Anwar Hussain on the podcast today. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So could you introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure, happy to do so. So I'm actually trained as a physician in emergency and family medicine, but my experience in health IT spans most of my career in healthcare. So I practiced urgent care for a while, and then the IT bug hit, and that's been about 19 years now. And my experience ranges from frontline informatics, all the way to managing large teams in big health systems and startups. And so I've even founded a startup back in the early 2000s when digital healthcare was not that interesting, but as compared to now.
Very cool. So when you say when you first got the bug 19 years ago, what was one of your first ways you became interested in digital health?
Yeah, I was actually working for a chief operating officer of UMass Health System, at which point I was tasked to look at ER overcrowding, which I thought, maybe if we digitize everything, including electronic health records, somehow overcrowding should get reduced. You get more efficient, and somehow, overcrowding should go down. It was actually the opposite. So EHRs worsened it. Which really surprised me, it was, and it still does. It hasn't really changed, and so interestingly, that's what triggered my interest in tech. And so from then on, it was all about learning why. What are the nuts and bolts? How do we try to, create better systems? And what are EHRs, et cetera? All of it. So it started at that point and just exploded, at least personally speaking.
Very, very cool. Okay, so I know you're an investor in RhythmVC. So can you talk about what you're looking for when you're investing in digital health, or maybe startups that are interested in the area? What should they be thinking about from your perspective? What do you see as kind of the hot topics, hot areas? What do you look for?
I would probably, at a high level, talk about three areas that we like very much as a team. One is enterprise, which is how do you build B2B software? We are by definition a VC on the smaller side, but focused heavily on software mainly. So enterprise is a big deal for us. So any large subsector of healthcare is a target for us. So health systems, payers, pharma, all of those are fair targets on the enterprise side. The second is consumer. Consumer, digital health is truly interesting, but it's like the Wild West. We still haven't seen anything that truly grips us to the point where we're going to keep watching, but we haven't seen anything pop up that, for example, I try to relate this to people. If you see anything as exciting as Facebook in healthcare on the consumer side, then you've hit gold on digital health. But we've yet to see anything that exciting. But we're always keeping our eyes and ears open to see what might be there on the consumer space. And then the third side, which is truly, I think, exciting but underrated, is this idea of hybrids, where software is taking on a bigger role in older technology like devices. So, for example, if you look at glucometers, the older glucometers, they just used to measure blood sugar. Nowadays, it'll do predictions. Nowadays, it'll track you in very, minute details. So those sorts of things are exciting for us. We think that this combination of hardware and software, whether it's in glucometers and other things, is truly an underrated area, but truly exciting for us. So we always watch for those things. And a lot of other folks don't seem to pay that much attention. So that's good for us.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, because I think one thing for me around digital health is behavior change. You have to get individuals to think about, for traditional telehealth, for example, I'm going to pick up my phone instead of going to urgent care or whatnot. But those smart devices are taking something that's already so entrenched in the market and just making it that much better and more useful.
Yeah.
So that makes total sense, that would be a huge value add.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point you make. I think that I think COVID has sort of magnified this idea of self-management, and even defining what is point of care. It looks very different now than it even did before COVID. People used to do telehealth. It's not a new technology, nor is it deep tech, but the spread of that technology so widely, I think, is what's intriguing, and how the average person knows now, well, I don't need to go to urgent care. I can simply talk to my doctor, and you could resolve quite a few problems. I mean, you certainly can't replace in-person care, but you can certainly take care of the small stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of COVID, how has that changed things for you? I know you've been in this space for a long time, but have you really seen it as revolutionary? What people talk about, the change happening so rapidly. I mean, how do you view what happened in the past year?
Yeah, I think in some ways, it certainly is negative, but I think that I'll focus on the positive stuff, which I think one is this idea of what is point of care. It truly has, I think everyone has changed their mind about it, including physicians who are very traditional and don't view remote care as being realistic, which, I can understand where they're coming from. If you are an experienced physician, you pick up a lot of things with in-person care that you wouldn't be able to pick up through telemedicine. I think, however, what we're seeing now is this wide acceptance, not only from consumers, but also from physicians who are so, some people are fighting it still, but others are, open arm accepting it, which I think will be a good sign for the industry. What I like further is that telehealth is expanding into subspecialties. You typically will see urgent care or urgent care-like problems show up on telehealth, but now you're getting into cardiology or urology, and these are highly specialized folks who now are realizing that we can actually do things remotely that we never thought about previously. So I think one is this construct of what is point of care. The other thing I think really influenced me personally is, how do you define health? Being a physician, I'm trained in physical health. Primarily that's my job. You come to see me in urgent care, my job is to make sure you're not going to die, and I take care of your immediate needs, right? That's exactly the basic equation. However, as I sit back and look at COVID, I think we're starting to see the impact of COVID on people's mental health, on people's social health, and that construct of health has broadened for me significantly. Physical health is certainly important. I don't want to underestimate its importance, but the role of mental health in feeling, healthy is super important. We as physicians are undertrained in it, and the idea of social networks and how that supports an individual, again, is something that traditional physicians aren't trained in, but is a super important part of overall well-being. So I think those two things have really impacted how I view my decisions in investment, and also just looking at clinical problem solving.
Yeah, and I have many friends and individuals that talk about how hard it is to even find a good mental health counselor, right? And so telehealth really helps open that up, and it's a great example. Like you were saying, I'm sure it is better when you're actually in person, but at least you're doing that communication, which is as close as you can get in the mental health space, and just a huge, the access problem. And it really helps deal with that, especially during COVID. And for sure. Okay. So as a healthcare attorney, I every day spend, knee deep in regulations and HIPAA, and, how is telehealth going to change in the future, and what are the restrictions that are going to be put in place? Do you think about those things from an investor perspective? What lens do you come at that from? Do you see that as a real barrier? Are there certain areas where you're concerned that could really change the landscape? or is it just something you monitor? You talk about that, how that impacts your investments.
Yeah, no, I think of important aspects of our evaluation process, regulatory is super important, even in the software space. I know traditionally software is not considered a regulated product per se, like devices or pills or drugs. However, I think the FDA is starting to play a bigger role in this space, and I'm sure you're very well versed in that arena. And I think it's a good thing. Unfortunately, software can do harm. We've seen in the past where electronic health records, for example, can cause medical errors, which is very dangerous. So when we're talking about regulation, I think regulation should be in place to make sure to protect the patient. Primarily, that's our goal: protect all key stakeholders in the area of care, yet not stifle innovation.
Right.
It's a balancing act, but I think it's feasible. And software should not be considered any different than devices or pharma, especially the algorithms. I think I'll give you an example. Right now we have clinical guidelines which are based, ideally on clinical trials that tell you what to do, what's the best care for a specific type of patient. However, with the advent of artificial intelligence, if we find new knowledge, we could use that data to actually modify that clinical guideline. And that's where I think regulations need to step in. It should not be a free-for-all approach to create whatever knowledge you want to do and then implement that and expect physicians and patients to comply. It could be potentially very dangerous. We don't know what those algorithms can do short-term, medium-term, or long-term. So we have to be careful. So I think it's a positive, and ultimately to summarize, it's a positive in my view, as long as it doesn't stifle innovation significantly. And then second, it's a very important part of our evaluation process, at least personally speaking.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when you talk about AI. I know HHS came out earlier this year, towards the beginning of the year, with the new Biden administration, and they had some guidance talking about, we may be looking into regulating this. This is something that we're looking at. Nothing definitive to say that's actually what they're going to do, but it's certainly on their radar. So that's an area for me that's very interesting and exciting, but also just to see, okay, how are we going to regulate that so we can make sure people can still be innovative and we're not going to stifle that, like you said, and really encourage that level of smart innovation in the future. So yeah, that's going to be super cool to watch.
Yes,
I'm excited about that.
Very interesting to watch. Yeah.
Okay, so just to wrap up, what are you most excited about for the future of healthcare?
Interestingly, I think I'm going to talk about it in two different buckets. One is the technology itself, which is really exciting to me. I think artificial intelligence is very exciting. I think, however, people have to get into the knee-deep aspects of it. AI by itself, in a traditional sense, is not acceptable to patients and to physicians because much of it is not explainable. Meaning, I could find something interesting, and the doctor would say that is really scary because it doesn't really fit into our knowledge base of how patient care works. So if people want to do AI, they need to get into the knee-deep aspects of understanding healthcare delivery, expectations from users, and then getting into deep tech like explainable AI, which is one area that's actually growing, and it's still early, but I think that's one area I'm very excited with on the AI side. Other areas that we like from a technical sense are blockchain. Blockchain is truly interesting. Distributed ledgers, I think, and its application to health data is quite interesting. Another area is IoT, which is not really talked about that much, although I can imagine how that can be used for at-home care. And there's some robust tech behind it. It's not some simplistic stuff. And then, of course, cybersecurity, always a big deal in healthcare. And we need to make sure that we are able to implement applications that focus on that. At least for us, it's quite exciting. From an application standpoint, the actual tool that's used by end users, we always like B2B enterprise stuff. Things like, which may sound boring, but compliance, always interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Revenue
For me, I
revenue
think that's
cycle.
interesting.
Yeah. It's this is the stuff that, wakes up CIOs, wakes up CMIOs that, we're not doing things right, and they're willing to pay for. So bread and butter stuff like revenue cycle. I'll give you an example. I think there is a big gap between what is required in billing and documenting in healthcare versus what physicians and nurses and others who are clinicians know how to do. So if there's a way to merge that, I think there's a true opportunity for startups. So I think the tech is exciting. Truly, I leaps and bounds. Every day there's something else I'm reading about. And then, of course, healthcare is a monster that people can find all sorts of places to work in. So truly an exciting time to do innovation in healthcare and launch a startup or get involved in a startup.
Yeah, very cool. Well, this is excellent. Thank you so much. You have wonderful insight. That's really great. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Anwar, for being a guest. We will be posting our vidcasts on YouTube and our social media pages. And if you are interested, please subscribe, follow us, or send us a message. Thank you.